Good evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott, and tonight we have as our guest a friend of the show, someone who's been on a couple of times before. We have the president of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, Mariyana Spyropoulos. Mariyana, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thank you, Kevin. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Well, people take water for granted, don't they?
Absolutely.
And so they don't know where it comes from, they don't know where it goes to, and they don't know how that cycle works all the way through.
Right.
But I think this is particularly relevant because the water rec department moves the water after we've used it and takes care of it from the drain on out, right? And in light of recent storms on the East Coast, where we've seen what happens when large amounts of water can't be accommodated, we think even more about water reclamation, right? So let's start by talking about what is the district, what exactly does it do, and how important is it in the life of Chicagoans?
Well, you're absolutely right. We do take water for granted, and we can do that in the Chicagoland area because we're so fortunate to have about 20% of the world's fresh water right in our backyard in the Great Lakes. So we're a little bit spoiled here. You turn on the tap and you have incredible water 24/7, and not all communities have such a great gift in terms of natural resources. But on the flip side, we have climate change and we have incredible storms here in the Chicago area, and so we're prepared for a lot of that with our infrastructure. And the Water Reclamation District is a countywide agency that treats wastewater and manages stormwater. And because our sewer system is a combined sewer system where we're dealing with both rainwater and wastewater together,
combined into the same flow, right?
Exactly. So we've had to deal with a lot of stormwater because they're both in the same system. So back in the 1880s, Chicago used to put its waste in the river. The river ran into Lake Michigan, and as you can imagine, people were getting sick. The state legislature created our agency, and one of the first things we did was to reverse the flow of the river.
And that's a famous engineering feat in Chicago history.
Absolutely.
So your organization was you're the guys who actually did that, right?
Right, because our mission is to protect the water environment. So at that time, with what we knew, what existed at that time, the way to protect the lake environment was to direct that flow in a different direction. But as Chicago grew, in the 1920s and 30s, we built 7 filtration plants throughout Cook County. And one of the largest filtration plants is our Stickney plant, which is in the town of Cicero. And if you or any of your viewers would like to get a tour of one of our plants, we'd be happy to set that up for you. Just check out our website and contact my office, and I'd be happy to help. It's a really interesting process to see where everything goes. And as you pointed out, you don't know, and you sort of want to keep it out of your mind, like where all that stuff goes. But
out of sight, out of mind, right?
Everything, exactly, from your sink, your dishwasher, your washing machine, your toilet, your shower, all of that has to go somewhere. And it comes to our treatment plants. It goes to whichever treatment plant is closest to where a person lives. And we treat about 1.5 billion gallons of wastewater a day.
So I'm in Westchester. Does that mean Stickney's the plant closest to me?
It would go to Stickney, yes, absolutely.
So the last time I was at a water filtration plant was when I was in elementary school.
Okay.
I assume they've changed a little bit since then.
Well, water filtration was probably drinking water, as opposed to a water treatment plant.
Yes, and it's been so long ago.
A little bit of semantics here.
It probably was the input side, not the output side.
And you don't want to get those two mixed up.
Mixed up, no.
But in Chicago and Cook County, we're doing a good job.
So speaking of infrastructure, and you mentioned climate change and the occurrence of much larger storms, what kind of infrastructure changes are necessary? What are you guys looking at for now and into the future?
Well, because we're getting heavier rainstorms, and we're seeing that over time. And interestingly, our city planners were thinking about this back in the 1960s. City, state, and county government got together and said, we're going to have. The forecast was that weather would be changing, weather patterns would be changing. How do we deal with that? So they put together the Deep Tunnel Project.
And that started in the 60s?
They put together a commission in the 1960s, and in the 1970s they started construction. And that type of thing takes a lot of time. It's federally funded. So every year we have to go to Washington, talk to our legislators out there, and make sure that a portion of the budget allows for the continuation of the infrastructure projects we're working on. But we are almost complete with the entire project. So 109 miles of intersecting tunnels were completed in 2006. The Majewski Reservoir is complete, and that's in Des Plaines. That holds 300 million gallons.
Now, 300 million gallons, that's hard to picture. Is there some way we can envision what that really amounts to?
Well, I would say 1 inch of rain throughout Cook County is equal to 14 billion gallons. Now, it's
So
not...
if the entire county were covered with 1 inch.
Yes, and if it's not evenly distributed, there's some areas that get more than others, and it's certainly not going into the system. Some of it's absorbed on site where it falls, but 40% of Cook County is non-permeable surface. In other words, the water cannot be absorbed into the ground
So-
because we have development, concrete, asphalt.
Buildings, whatever.
Exactly. And so we have to start looking at things in addition to our infrastructure. How do we complement that with green infrastructure? Green infrastructure includes things like rain barrels, green roofs, anything like a permeable surface that will allow that water to be absorbed at the front end, because a lot of our infrastructure is getting older. Some of the pipes are smaller. They really can't handle that heavy flow of water. So we have to use other things to sort of capture that flow at the front end.
Now, that's actually a very interesting concept because we think about infrastructure, usually, at least I do, in terms of large-scale projects, highways, dams, that sort of thing. But infrastructure can be seen as a very individualized effort as well, right? Where rain barrels, so for example, in my neighborhood, there's a lot of older driveways that are just ribbons of concrete with grass in the middle. A lot of people paved those over and made it just big concrete. But that eliminates absorption space, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things we passed at the Water Reclamation District is a stormwater management ordinance. And it applies to the areas outside of Chicago. And it basically is designed to set certain standards for new development. So if you were going to build a strip mall or some kind of store or something that's going to be a certain square footage of concrete, you would then have to have a certain retention area to hold that water because you're taking it away by building your, like you said, the strip of grass in the driveway. You're taking away that absorption. But if you put a green roof on your building, you'll get credit in your detention area, and it can be smaller. If you put a little area of permeable pavement, then you can get further credit. So there's we're trying to incorporate the green infrastructure with the heavy-duty infrastructure that we already have in place to sort of work together. And so far it seems to be working.
Now, with the green infrastructure, one thing I would think of, this is a minor point, I'm sure, but with the green roofs, those have to be maintained as well, right?
Yep, yes,
so,
like a garden.
Like a garden, right. So I would think that from the developer standpoint, it might be easier just to create the permeable surfaces or the set aside for green land, right? Because that takes far less maintenance.
And it depends on what kind of business it is. There are some types of businesses that like incorporating different components of it. So rain barrels, green roofs, bioswales.
What is a bioswale?
So a bioswale is sort of a detention area where you have green space, and it can hold water, and the water can sit there for a period of time before it evaporates, as well as the green plants. If you use certain plants that have very deep roots, they can hold water for a period of time. So there's different components that you can use. You don't have to just go with one, or you don't have to go with a large piece of just one part. And it also can sort of work together to reduce the volume of water going into the system.
So I'm going to do a quick aside here, and I have to ask you, I know your professional training is as an attorney.
Yes.
So you are a lawyer. How on earth did you get into water reclamation? And you are obviously very well informed about it, so this is a very engineering-heavy discipline.
Yes.
How did you find yourself coming from the law into this?
Well, it's an elected office. Commissioners are elected every 2 years. 3 of us are elected. And I was elected in 2010.
So you're up for re-election in March.
I'm up for re-election. It's a 6-year term. I'll be up in March of next year, 2016.
In the primary, right?
Exactly. And it's very interesting because our agency does big infrastructure very well. But I was always interested in the environment and using the green infrastructure as a complement to that. And so I thought the agency could incorporate some of that at the time. So when I campaigned last time, I talked about green infrastructure, et cetera. And maybe it's a coincidence, but in 2011, we passed the stormwater management ordinance that included green infrastructure. I don't know. I don't know how that happened, but,
that is
the
why
timing
people
was
run,
great.
it's why people run, right? Because
Right.
you have an idea of how things ought to work, and you realize that, well, I have to be in some position of authority to make that happen.
Right.
So you run and make it happen, right?
And the Water Reclamation District is a great agency. I mean, reversing the flow of the river, they were pioneers in a lot of respects. And we're also looking at some very interesting things like resource recovery. So, for example, we talked about the treatment plant. You got your solids and liquids coming to the plant, never-ending supply of it. We're going to convert the biosolids into fertilizer. Of course, it will have to match an EPA standard of high quality to make sure that it's safe to grow tomatoes with. We currently use it for golf courses, but once it goes through that rigorous process and make sure that it's of a certain quality, we're going to start using that. We'll generate a revenue stream.
So that you'll sell that to people who want to
Yes.
use it to
So
grow
if
gardens,
people go
right?
to Home Depot now, they can buy Milorganite from Wisconsin. You'll be able to buy Chicago's version of that. It's the same thing.
Milorganite is the name?
Milorganite is from Wisconsin, and it
okay.
stands for Milwaukee's Organic
Ah,
something.
got it.
But
Sorry.
you'll be able to buy Chicago's version of that, and it'll be good for us as an agency because we'll be able to reduce our tax burden. Another thing we're doing is extracting phosphorus from our process. We'll use it as be able to sell it as a fertilizer, and we'll be able to generate revenue for our agency, again reducing our tax burden. So that is sort of the trend in this industry. How can we be more sustainable? And this is something that's really just developed, I would say, over the last 5 years or so. And we're also going to become energy neutral. So we have 7 filtration plants that run 24/7. And you need that to happen, right?
Sure,
You
sure.
flush that toilet
Any hour of the day.
any
Right.
hour of the day. You need things to work. So you can imagine what our electric bill is. We're capturing the gases that our process generates, converting it into energy, and our goal is to become energy neutral within 10 years, and we're 2 years into that.
Is that achievable? Is there enough gas that can be captured from this to make that work?
Well, that's just part of it. We're going to be using several different processes in order to create that energy that we need. So yeah, we're pretty confident that this is going to work.
This actually, first of all, I'm very happy to hear about the kind of environmental direction that the district is going in. But I'm also I'm surprised. I have to say, government takes such a bad rap in today's world. That here's a case where government is doing something very forward-thinking. Now, one of the questions I would ask you is, the Water Reclamation District is kind of one of those unknown agencies. It's very large. In fact, I think we were talking, isn't it the third largest budget after the city, the county, and
Yes,
MWRD?
we have a huge budget, and a lot of it goes towards maintaining our treatment plants.
So it's a huge organization, but people don't know what it is. If we were to stop 10 people on the street and say, tell me about MWRD, they would have no clue, right?
Maybe
So,
that's because we're doing such a good job.
well, I'm wondering, does that help you? It may help you do a good job because you're allowed to do things and work in a kind of apolitical environment.
Well, to touch on your first point, I think, government sometimes does get a bad rap, and maybe because those stories are more interesting to some people, I don't know. But on the flip side, our agency is something that is not talked about very often because we are wastewater, we're not drinking water.
Right.
And so I think people prefer it that way. It's not something that you really want to talk about. And so maybe because we're doing a good job, it's sort of under the radar. And not to say that we don't have some things that we need to work on. We're always looking at how we can improve that. We look at our strategic plan. Are we on focus? Are we on budget? And sometimes we have to tweak things here and there. But I like to think that we're doing a good job there.
Well, it sounds like you are, yeah. So you brought along some photos that we can take a look at, right?
Yes.
Some visuals.
Yes.
So we'll ask if our crew can cue those up, and we'll talk about them as they come up, right?
Okay.
All right. So First one we've got up here is, tell us what we're looking at.
So that is our Stickney Water Reclamation Plant located in the town of Cicero.
And it's the township of Stickney, which is where it gets its name, right?
Correct. And it's it is the largest treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant in the world. We get guests from all over the world who want to come and see the various processes. Everything, all the solids and liquids come to this plant, they get separated. The liquid gets cleaned up to about 96% clean, and then it becomes effluent when it is released from our plant.
And what's the definition of effluent?
Effluent's not 100% clean.
Okay.
It's about 96% clean. And then the solids, like I said, are made into biosolids. And all of that takes place at our Stickney plant. This is a diagram that I often bring to presentations when I'm trying to, when I talk about basically the sewer system. So you see the structure is connected to the local sewer system, which is controlled by each of the municipalities.
And that's the larger diameter pipe that we're looking at?
No, so the smaller one would be the local municipality that is directly connected to the home. And then that, when there's a rain event, then that overflows to the medium pipe. And that is an interceptor that brings everything to our treatment plants. However, when we get a heavy rainstorm, because we have a combined sewer system, that overflow will then go to the largest pipe that you see where that arrow is coming out of. That is the deep tunnel. There's 109 miles of that. And if that gets full, then it overflows into the reservoir.
Which
and
is
we
what
have
we
a
see in the
picture,
far right, right?
and there's the reservoir. This is Thornton Reservoir, and the road that's going over it is I-80. And you notice the semi-trucks that are driving over look like little toys.
Right.
That just gives you an idea of how large it is. So the Thornton Quarry was part of the Thornton Reservoir was part of a quarry system. And that still exists in the further side of the picture. Though that's still going to be a quarry. But in the
That's at the top of the picture that we're looking
correct.
at? Yeah, okay.
And then on the bottom of the picture is the Thornton Reservoir that we converted into a reservoir. It's going to hold stormwater and wastewater together. You can't see the hole from the tunnel, but that will feed into this reservoir. So if there's that overflow of water that I spoke of before, that will go into the reservoir. It will hold 7.9 billion gallons of water.
Billion with a B.
With a B. And there's aerators that will be floating on there to keep that water moving, because you don't want that stagnant water. And it'll serve 14 communities in the south suburbs. It's located around South Holland, Thornton area. And according to our calculations, it's going to mitigate about $40 million in flooding damage.
Wow.
And so if that gets full of stormwater, it will be pumped back to the Calumet treatment plant, which is located closest to this site. And then it'll be cleaned in the normal manner that it would take, and then it'll be released into the Calumet Sag.
So when will this reservoir come online?
We had the ribbon cutting on September 1st, and we basically consider it the Grand Canyon of the Midwest.
So it's ready to run right now?
Correct.
Right? Okay.
So then you and I were just talking about green infrastructure, and here's an example of a rain barrel that people can use. We have a rain barrel program at the Water Reclamation District. We're giving away 15,000 rain barrels throughout the county.
Really? How does one apply for a free rain barrel?
Through the municipality. So either the mayor in your town will have applied or is in the process of applying for it, because we have to sign an intergovernmental agreement. And in the city of Chicago, we're doing it through wards or various clubs.
Now, the water barrel, really, I would think it does two things. It's both input and output, right? Because you're taking rainwater that would otherwise flow into the sewage system, but you're also, whatever you can use from the rain barrel, water plants to water your yard, we don't have to get out of the tap, right? So is there a double savings there?
Correct. So first, it's great for the environment, water conservation. You're collecting storm water, and you can use it to water your plants, water the grass, You can, wash your tools or your boots that had mud on them or something like that. A lot of different things. You wash your car with it. On the other side of it, the distribution of the rain barrels and why we're doing it is to reduce flooding. So if you're distributing the rain barrels in a concentrated effort, which is why we're distributing according to municipality, if you get 3 blocks that each have a rain barrel, you're reducing 50 gallons of water per household. That'll reduce the volume that's going into the local sewer system.
And does that really make a difference? I mean, if you take, say, my neighborhood where there's maybe 20 houses in
If you get 50% of the community on board, it can make a difference. If you got one here and there, it's
not
nice
enough.
that they're doing it, I mean, for water, conservation purposes, but if you're using it for reduction of flooding or stormwater, it's not going to have the same effect.
So really, it requires a joint effort with the municipality to try
Right.
to market it to the residents, and
Right.
that's why it's free. Just do it.
We've gotten incredible response. We've gotten a lot of, thousands of people are asking for the rain barrel. So,
Really, that's
yeah.
great to hear.
Yeah, it's exciting that people are open to it. Some people take a little bit more time to understand, how they could utilize it, but we've gotten really great feedback.
So we've got one more up here. This is,
So this is great. So, our focus on green infrastructure includes a project where we've converted the playgrounds of 4 schools, Chicago Public Schools. We've converted the playgrounds from asphalt concrete into a permeable surface. And this is going to absorb water because it's all a permeable surface. We located schools that had a lot of flooding, and we thought if we could reduce the amount of impermeable surface to a permeable surface, then that would help reduce the flooding
Now,
in the area.
This is obviously a rendering of something.
Correct.
Is this an actual site as well that this rendering represents?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So what we see is what looks like a soccer field, that green swath in the middle.
Right.
That was previously concrete or asphalt or something that
Right.
was not permeable?
And there was no soccer field on there before.
So now
So
there
I
is.
mean, if your playground, at your grammar school was anything like mine, it was just sort of like
It was asphalt.
concrete and
Yeah,
asphalt.
yeah.
Maybe a few things to play on, but this is a real environment that, the goal is several pronged here. And first, you're getting kids to use the playground, and so they've got a lot of different options there. They're going to want to play there. Number 2.
Well,
you're-
it's safer too, I would think, I mean, it's
Teachers
hard.
can take the kids outside and use it as a classroom. There's various spaces they can use as a classroom. Number 3, like you just said, when you get the kids and the parents engaged in that space, you're going to keep the people away that shouldn't be using that space,
Right.
and keep the people who are supposed to use the space the way they're supposed to use it. So we're really excited. We got great feedback from the communities. They're all really excited about it. It's gotten national attention. It's being used as a program in other communities in New York, and I think several people in California. So there's a lot of interest in this type of thing.
And I assume the Chicago Public Schools is cooperating as well. And
They're very excited about it as well. And we're expanding the program to 30 more schools.
wow.
So
you
a lot
start
of interest in it.
4 is the pilot, and then you're going.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we got one more here. This is our beautiful city, right?
Yeah, and so, we're talking about water, but one of the most important things is, we know now that California is dealing with some challenges in terms of their water supply.
Most of the western states, in fact.
Right. And we're, like we were talking about, we're sort of spoiled here in Chicago because we have this incredible source of drinking water. We sit near 20% of the world's fresh water. And we sort of talk about at the Water Reclamation District, when we talk to the community, we talk about water conservation. What can you do at home? What are some of the tips that you can do at home in order to just be a little smarter in terms of your water use? So a couple of things, people could use is when you're brushing your teeth, turn off the faucet until you're ready to rinse. And you can save 5 gallons of water that way.
5 gallons.
Yes, because the faucet's just running while you're sitting there brushing your teeth, and it keeps running and running, and it's all going into the wastewater.
Right.
Another thing is when you're going to take a shower, you turn on the shower to warm it up before you get in there. Put a bucket there to capture that water until you're ready to go in. Another 5 gallons of water. That you're saving from going down the drain. Okay, it doesn't sound like a lot, but just
But it
think
adds
of
up.
but just think of if everybody did that. and everybody's just started shifting the way that they thought about, water and, let's say you have a half-empty bottle of water at a party or something, instead of, throwing it down the drain, put it in a plant or something, or try to think of it in a different way. Think of it as a resource rather than a waste, a product.
Well, and I think that's so interesting because we've been talking about how we're right next door to the freshwater reservoir on the planet.
Right.
Actually, someone corrected me the other day. It's in liquid form.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, because 3% of fresh water is captured in the icebergs, or there may be aquifers that we haven't tapped into yet. But generally speaking, the fresh water is.
It's right next door.
Right.
Yeah. So given that we have that enormous resource, it's easy to think, well, why should I bother? It's all right there. We're never going to run out.
Right.
But especially with climate change, we don't know what the future holds, right?
No, absolutely not. And there's a lot of things that happen when you have industry around, especially around the Great Lakes. You want to make sure that people are taking care of the water supply, that they're cognizant of it. Humans can't go more than a couple days without water. You spend a lot of money at Starbucks on coffee. You spend money on gas at the gas station because we have to go to our jobs, et cetera. But we don't think about water, which is probably one of the most essential things that we have.
Yeah, in fact, I think we can go without food for like a month, I think, or some extended period of time.
That's what they say, yeah.
Yeah, but water, it's a few days and
that's it.
That's it,
right. And depending on if you're a senior or, a child or something like that, hydration is really important.
So where do you go from here? You're running for another 6-year term. What do you want to get accomplished in the next 6 years?
Well, I want to make sure that we get this energy neutrality accomplished, and it looks like we're on track for that. And just using more green infrastructure and making sure I go out to communities a lot and I talk to different groups about green infrastructure and water conservation, and I'll continue to do that until I've converted everybody in Cook County to use green infrastructure.
It's a noble mission.
Yes.
So as the president, you have a certain amount of ability to set the agenda, right? So has it been difficult to talk about or to move people along on this green agenda, or has everyone kind of seen that that's a worthwhile path to follow?
Well, there's 9 commissioners, and I'm just one at the end of the day. Although I am president of the board, I'm one of the commissioners, and I would say that the commissioners aren't. I mean, everybody understands the value of green infrastructure, and that's the direction that we're going. So no, it hasn't been difficult at all.
So the last thing I want to talk about is just how important this is to people, and you've talked about green infrastructure and what people can do. How aware should people be of this part of the water cycle, and where should they be thinking longer term? I mean, how much of a priority do people need to make this in their own lives?
I think it's very important as we're looking at sustainability. You look at the whole process in terms of there's a ban on plastic bags. People are looking at that. We want to think about what we're putting in our wastewater. So, for example, we try to tell people not to throw their expired pharmaceuticals down the drain.
Right.
Throw them in the garbage. Police stations sometimes are a drop-off point. But make sure you don't put it in the water system. Don't put it down the drain. Don't put it in the toilet.
Well, I can't think of better advice. That's a great way to wrap up. Mariyana, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thanks,
and we'll
Kevin.
Have you back after you're reelected. We'll have you back and we can talk about the future some more.
Great. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. And thank you for joining us once again on Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. You can find us every Saturday night at 8 on Comcast Channel 19 and find us on the web at publicperspective.tv. So till next time, thank you and good night.